Okay, I started working at the University of Miami in a shrimp project that they had there when I was doing some graduate work. And I worked with Yoshi Hirono, who was Japanese, and later I worked with him more than just this stint that we had at the University of Miami. What we were doing was we were getting animals and raising them in ponds. We had a lab there. They were grew shrimp, so we didn't do the maturation for them. We just did the grow out. So they seeded the ponds, and they grew very slowly because it was cold water. So anyway, the animals were growing. They have a cool snap there in the winter, and when the cold weather hit, they all disappeared. And we thought they might have died from the cold, but they hadn't. About 2 months later, when it warmed up, they started popping out of the mud. So that was our first experience with grew shrimp, and my first experience. After that, I was continuing to work. That was at a power plant in Miami, so a nuclear power plant. So they had the energy to run the ponds and the aerators and everything. And then I got a note from my father, who was the director of medicine for the United Fruit Company. And he said, there's a project going on that our company is sponsoring. Would you be interested in it? And I said, sure. Sounds very interesting. It was in Honduras. So I traveled to Honduras, and I was there. This was about, let's see, I have to go back in the years. It was, must have been about 1968. So it was quite a while ago. And I had lived in Panama for a while because my father worked there with the bananas. He was the medical director, so we were in Panama. And something that always surprised me was at the commissary, they had all these big shrimp. And I thought, boy, they are really good. And would you believe it, at that time, they were 50 cents a pound. It's hard to believe. These are like 6 or 8 on a pound. So anyway, we went and I worked in Honduras. I was a liaison person. I helped them with the Honduran government, and I also worked with the shrimp in the, we had a little sort of small hatching facility, but it was nothing big. And so I told them, I said, if we want to get big shrimp, we should go to Panama. So I set up 2 trips to Panama, and we brought back the females. But we didn't really have a hatchery. So we just had to put them in tanks, and these were shrimp that had already mated. We saw the eggs on them, and they spawned, and we send the spawns to the University of Miami where they could raise the larvae. And then they sent them back to Panama, to Honduras, I'm sorry. And in Honduras, they were very low density because this was just the beginning of this. This was 1969, and it was the beginning of shrimp, really, in aquaculture anyway, for Panama. But anyway, these animals had a low density in the pond, and they were amazing growth. They grew, I think, up to about 27 grams in 59 days, which is really incredible. So the potential was there, but we didn't have the number. So I was working there, and I learned how to draw the nauplii and other things from an entomologist. He showed me how you do half of the thing and then fold it over. And it worked out very well. And then my friend Yoshi that I knew at Miami, he came in and he said, David, how you doing down here? He came to visit me. And I said, well, I'm not sure because these 2 companies aren't shrimp companies during this project, and they're getting a little anxious, and I'm not sure it's going to last very long. So he said, well, that's interesting because I'm working with a group from Florida. It's called Ralston Purina Group. And so he said, maybe we can work something out and get you a job. And so luckily it worked out. The shrimp project in Honduras closed, and I ended up in Panama because I told them that's where the shrimp were at the Florida group. And that's where I met Bill Moore, who was the manager of it. And Yoshi was there, and Ron Staha, and Joe Mountain, and a group of biologists. And I said, if we really want to do this, I need to go to Panama. And I'll do the research and see what we're going to do, because we've got to learn how they mate, how they spawn, and also how to raise the larvae. And so I was the man in Panama, the only one, for 3 years. And I had a shrimp boat that was rented, and I'd go out, and they were long days. We'd go out at 10 in the morning, and we'd come in about 4 in the morning. And initially, I would take those shrimp to the airport in ice and a cooler and ship them to Florida where they had the hatchery. And we did this first with the shrimp, and that didn't work out too well. And so we went to the eggs, and that was sort of a problem too. It was kind of a hardship on the eggs. So I said, well, fine, I've got to do this in the lab. So I went ahead and hatched them. And at the larval stages, anopular stage 3, I packed them and shipped them up, and that's what they worked with. And it was very interesting because when I first went out in the shrimp boat, I didn't know if the females were fertilized or not. And it was hard to tell. I would go out in the morning and I'd stay out till about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'd come back in. And I couldn't tell if they were fertilized, so it was hit and miss. And then one day I was looking at the female shrimp, and I noticed this glassy gel, which turned out to be the spermatophore. And that's the way I found out that they were mated already. And what happened was, in all the pictures, they show the male apparatus for the fertilization. And what happens is, it's only on the female a short time, it breaks off. So you look for the positive one and it's not there. And that was an interesting thing. And then I worked with the different species that we had in Panama. We had 3 species, the Occidentalis, which was the biggest one. And then we had Solarostris, and then we had Panama. And these were the 3 non-groove shrimp, which were the ones we ended up using, because they were a lot easier to raise and a lot easier to spawn. And finally, the one that turned out to be the prize species was the one that only represented 1 to 3% in the catch. And so I was going with the top runner, which was the Occidentalis, which is about 80% of the catch. And then finally we found out through studies in the animals that they raised in Crystal River and sent to farms that the Panama was the best species. But unfortunately, it was not the one in greatest demand. And so what happened was we had to learn how to mature it in captivity. And that was another story. So, I don't know, it goes on a long time.
Yeah.
You know.
And where does that bring you to today?
Well, what happens, we were able to do the maturation. There were very interesting steps we had to go through, and we found out that some very important foods were these marine worms, polychaetes. And it was very interesting. We used to have to go in the sand and dig out their tube and find out where they were and then pull them up. And then one day one of the watchmen came, "Why are you digging that up?" He said, "Oh, you do, you get one of these bicycle pumps and you pump it and the worm shoots out." And that's how we ended up getting the worms. So it was very interesting. At that time, Joe Mountain was the one working in maturation, and I would still go out and get the females and bring them in that had mated, because we were still working on how to mature them, the feeds and all of that, and how to get them to mate. And we finally figured out with the light phase and other things how you could make the animals fertilize and mate, which worked out pretty good. That way we had an amount of shrimp that we needed for the larvae for the hatchery.
Yeah. And where does that bring us to now? What are you doing?
Well, right now, and that led me to work with shrimp for many years with Agmarina, which was the Wilson Perina facility. I designed laboratories in Colombia, and then I went to Belize and worked with Robbins McIntosh, who did the intensive culture, and we had ponds where we were raising much higher densities, maybe 20 times as much as you've raised in a normal pond. This was controlling the water and having it in a lined pond where you could do water exchange, and you could clean up the bottoms, just siphon them, and it was very interesting, very productive. And I helped with the hatchery. I designed the maturation hatchery and the larval rearing, and Robbins took care of growing the shrimp in the grow-out ponds. And the new methods that were being used, the technology that was needed for the production at high densities, which is being used in many places now in the world, and with very good results. In fact, and then after that, I worked with Agmarina until about 1989, and then I did some consulting, and then I went with Ziegler Brothers, and I worked with them for almost 30 years, helping to design the diets for the shrimp and traveling to different points in the world and do studies with the larvae and the shrimp, and that way we could improve the diets, and we did very well. And so I've been traveling all over the world to do that kind of stuff. Well, it was a very interesting career.
And you're still traveling?
And now I'm interested in starting a new project in Panama to do the freshwater shrimp, which is called Macrobrachium carcinus, and see if we can't create cooperatives for the people of Panama that have farms and have an area where they could grow shrimp and they don't have to be close to the ocean, and set up a laboratory that could supply seed for them. So we'll be working on something new.
Wow, that's fantastic, and hope it is obviously successful, like everything else that you seem to touch.
Well,
turns out successfully.
It's very interesting for sure, and I must just mention some of the people that I was with. Tom Ziegler in the feed company and his sons, and also the people that were in the hatchery. Bill Moore was very important in all the development of this, and Ron Staha, Joe Mountain, David Flushing, just a few of the people that were important in that project.
Well, Mr. Drennan, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Okay.
A fascinating career and
Right.
a big impact.
Right.
Thank you.